Welcome back to Salesforce Mojo. I'm really excited about what we're going over today. If you want to learn about customizing checkout here, learn about how to simply do this with declarative tools, or even how to do this with customization, stick around. We're going to go through both of those examples, and this is all going to be in the current B2B commerce Aura-based template here. All right, so just to set the stage for what we're going to be doing in this session, we'll be doing two things. One, we'll be trying to remove the inventory check, and that will allow us to move through checkout quicker. And two, we're going to capture the delivery date or the desired delivery date. And we're going to go through two different options there, as I mentioned, both declaratively and through a Lightning Web component. So stay tuned, we're going to get right into it now. So here we are inside of our Salesforce Mojo instance. The first place we're going to go to do our configuration is into flows. Once we're over in Flow, you will be familiar with some of the subflows of checkout that we've gone over very briefly last time. But before we dive into this, let's go straight into our main checkout flow here, which should be called Checkout Flow Template. Now in this instance, we have not yet fully configured checkout, so we're going to be doing some of that along the way here. The first thing that you need to do here is save as, and we're actually going to save a copy of this because this template can't be used for our checkout. So let's call this Tiny Homes Checkout Flow. And we're going to go to Advanced. We want to make sure that we switch this to System Context with Sharing. Otherwise, it will not render correctly for our end user. We'll click Save here. And once we have that saved, just a quick orientation on what this actually is doing here. This is a orchestration flow. Some people like to term it as. You can see that in this flow that we have one main decision hub. And this main decision hub is basically switching between several subflows down below that enables the users to go through these screens in sequence and be able to eventually go through checkout. Now, what we're trying to accomplish here, as mentioned before, is remove the inventory capability or the inventory screen here, because in our instance, we aren't going to check for inventory when a person goes through checkout. The second piece is we want to add a delivery date when we actually go through checkout. But first, let's do inventory. Now you can see that if we go a little bit closer here, we have an inventory component right here, or a subflow. This one's actually pretty easy because if we don't want a screen in the subflow, this is just a flow, so we can just remove it. So what I like to do here is I like to keep the subflow on here, but remove the inbound arrow there and the outbound arrow. You can also go back up to the decision hub and actually remove the inventory section altogether. However, it's not going to hurt anything because it basically is never going to meet that requirement. And you might be asking, okay, so what is this actually doing with this main checkout session state, and why does it say inventory here? Well, what happens is when a person comes into checkout in the Aura-based checkout for the first time, it goes into this get or create session subflow. And what this subflow does is essentially what it says. It will either look for an existing session, which allows you to move through the checkout without having to go through every step if you've abandoned it and come back, or it'll create a new session for you. So we basically need to go down here, and our first section here is shipping address. And you can see that each of these subflows has an input variable of the cart ID of the user that's currently going through this, the current state the person is in checkout, and the next state. So you can see that right now it's sending it to inventory. Well, if we were to save this and activate it, we're going to run into an error because it's going to try to send it to inventory, but we've disconnected inventory. So what we actually want to do here to remove inventory is go down to our inventory component, and you can see that right now it's configured to go to the confirm price. So I'm going to copy this just for us to paste in a moment. But you can see the next step is confirm price. So if a person were to go through this before we augmented it, they'd see shipping address, then they'd see inventory, and then they see confirm order. Well, we want to skip inventory, so simply what we have to do is go back up to shipping address, change inventory to confirm price, and now what it's going to do is go to shipping address first. When it's done and goes back to the main decision hub and comes back down, it's going to go right into confirm price. Now that one's pretty easy. If we were to try to remove some of the other elements down here, it's going to be a little bit more complex, because in order for a cart to be turned into an order and eventually an order summary, it has a minimum set of requirements. And so some of these pieces here are part of those minimum set of requirements. However, inventory and confirm price and some of the other ones aren't minimum requirements. So for this case, it was relatively easy. So now that we've done that first adjustment here, we've now accomplished task number 1, which is removing inventory from checkout. So let's move on to our second goal here, which is to add a delivery date. But before we do that, let's go ahead and activate this, get this into our community, and make sure that we can see checkout properly. So we'll simply click activate here. And once we've activated this, we'll go back over into our setup menu, go to all sites, and we'll go to Builder. Another way of getting there, if you're curious, is you can come back over here to Tiny Homes and click Experience Builder. So there really are 2 different ways of going there. But we'll go over into Checkout, and in Checkout, we're going to see that because this is an Aura-based community, we still have this checkout flow capability on the checkout page here. So simply what we're going to need to do is move this over to the Tiny Homes checkout flow, which is the one we just created, and we're going to click Publish. And now that we've published that, we should be able to go back to our user and log in as them. So I'm going to come over to our user that we've set up previously, and I believe it was under Acme, and we have, back to Acme here, under Howard, we've set him up previously. So we'll go over and click Login as Experienced User here. All right, and if we've set all the security sharing permissions up correctly, then we should be able to see products up here. And what we'll do is go to products, and we can see the couple of products that we've set up previously. And why don't we add front door to our cart, since that is the cheapest door I gotta say I've ever seen before. So we'll go into cart here, and we're now on cart. We'll click proceed to checkout, and if we've done everything correctly, yep, checkout has shown for us here. So this first screen is the shipping address screen, and we're able to see a shipping address, which is our contact point address back on our account. So that's how that information is shown. But as I've mentioned previously, one of the things I want to do is also ask for a delivery date or a desired delivery date. This is something that comes up relatively frequently, but it's just a simple example to illustrate as we go through this how to update these screens. But you could do whatever you want, and it could be much more complicated than that as well. But we want to have a field that goes right at the very bottom here that really shows us the capability to add that date. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go back to our flow. And you can see we have shipping address here, and it's referencing a shipping address subflow. So we're going to go back over into our flows, and we're going to try to find that flow for us. And we should be able to see that right down here. So again, this is a template. If we want to change anything about this, we have to clone it. So we'll go into it, and we will click Save As, and we'll do Tiny Homes shipping address. And we will click Save. So now we have this subflow here that we can really use wherever we want. But one thing we should do before we forget is we should go back to our main checkout flow here, and we'll refresh it so it pulls the latest metadata, and we'll go down and we'll add a new subflow component down here, and let's find our new Tiny Homes shipping address. And this is really exactly the same as the one that's on there right now, but we want to make sure that we don't forget to actually hook that back in, because that's one of the most common things that people forget. We're going to map this up with the information that is needed. I always, just so I don't fat finger something, I will click Save here, and then I go back over and I just copy the values between the two before I switch things over, just to make sure I get all the spelling and everything right here. And once we have that set up here, then we should be able to click Done. And let's just confirm we have everything. Yep, looks like nothing's put in the next state there. So again, we'll be able to disconnect that shipping address here. We'll zoom out a bit, and we'll connect shipping address to our new shipping address component, and we'll remove the output there. I like to keep these on the screen, but just kind of on the side of the new ones. And we'll map that back to the assignment and click Save As. and activate. And now we're done with the checkout flow. We don't need to come back here. So I'm going to close this and go back over to our shipping address, because now everything is going to happen in this component or this subflow right here. So the first thing we need to decide is there's really two options here. There's a more declarative option, which we're going to start with, and there's a more customized option, which we'll do right after. So stay tuned for both of those. The declarative option is for really simple and straightforward use cases. And then really in this case, that applies here. So if we go into our screen component, this is just a flow. So if you're familiar with flow, you can do whatever you want here. So what we'll do is we will pull in a text. Actually, we want to pull in a date. That would make more sense here. We're going to give a label of desired delivery date. And we'll leave that as is, and we'll click done. And now the next time someone sees this flow, once we've saved and activated, they'll see that value in there as well. Let me open this back up one more time. You can see this ship to here looks really familiar to this ship to here. That's because this is what we're looking at here. This is just a screen flow. So this first component is the shipping address component that comes with B2B commerce. So we could, in theory, rip this out and replace it with something custom that we have, as long as it maps and does the things that this standard component does. But we don't need to do that in this case. We just need to add one of these. But the thing we do need to do is we do need a place to put this desired date. So before we go any further, let's go and let's figure out where we actually going to put this data. Now what I want at the end of the day is I want this desired date to flow all the way down to order summary. However, in order to do that, we need to start with cart, because at this point in the checkout flow, we only have the cart. We don't have the order and the order summary yet. So what we'll do is we'll create a new field on the cart. Let's go over into our object manager here, and we'll go into cart, click fields, and this is just a standard object here, so we can create whatever field we want. We'll come down to date, click next here, and let's call this delivery date. And we'll click next, and we want to make sure that we give permissions to our tiny home user here. In this case, we're doing it at the profile level, but you could also do that at the permission set level. Okay, so once we've saved that, we should be able to come back over into our cart, which you can find by going to edit here and adding more items, then going to cart if it's not already on your menu. Mine is already on there, so if I click cancel here and go down, you can see that it's one of the objects I can view. And you might have to tinker with the default filters here just to make sure that it will actually show you what carts are available or currently active in your instance. But once you do find that, you should be able to come over here. Let's do a quick refresh just to make sure delivery date does come onto the record here. Okay, so once we've wired this all in, we will be able to save the delivery date to the cart, which is useful, but it's not exactly what we want. We want this to go all the way to the order summary. So while we're at it, let's go ahead and create one on the order and order summary as well, and I'll talk about how that maps later on here. So we'll go back to our object, go to order, and we'll do the same thing on this object and order summary. So I'll be right back once that's done. Okay, so now we have the delivery date on the cart, order, and order summary. So let's go back to our flow because that's where we're going to start wiring this actually in. So we now have the desired delivery date here. You can see as we scroll to the right that right now what it's doing is updating. If we open this component here, it is updating the cart delivery group, which is one of the records that gets created when the shipping address is added to the cart. That isn't exactly where we want this, right? We did this at the cart level. So one of the things we're going to do is go and add another update records here, and we'll say update cart. We'll find the cart record in here, and we'll find it by looking at the ID. And we should have a variable called cart ID that's being used across this flow here. And we will find the delivery date. And now what we're going to do is we're going to find the desired delivery date from our screen component. And we simply can map that straight across. We are going to remove this and say this is going to happen after all the other actions in this flow happen here. And let's just align these a little bit so we can make it look good. and we'll click Save. And once we activate this and we go back to our screen flow, we should be able to see the desired delivery and also be able to update that once we've moved past this screen flow. So let's try to do that real quick. We'll click Activate here. Let's go back over into Checkout. And because this is a just a screen flow that's loading components, we should just be able to click Refresh here, and it should show us the latest version of this. And it is. So not only can we select the information above, we can also now put in a date here, which in our case, we want the desired delivery date to be maybe the 28th. Now, when we click Next here, what will happen is we'll move on past the screen component in the subflow to all of the update portions of this screen flow. And then once we have successfully moved all the way through that, it will go to the next subflow. So let's go ahead and click Next and see if everything worked for us okay. All right, so we made it to the delivery method, which is the next screen here. So we validated two things here. We've been able to successfully see the desired delivery date, but we've also been able to skip inventory and go straight to delivery method. So let's go back to our cart record and see if everything looks okay over there. All right, and here we are back on our cart record, and you can see that underneath the desired delivery, it does say 2/28/2023. So that is perfect. That's exactly what we wanted. Simple add to the flow and didn't require much customization. So now let's move on to option 2. Now option 2 is a little more complicated. Let's say we have a little bit more of a complicated use case and we need to be able to do this in a Lightning Web Component. Now how would we actually do that in the flow? For the purpose of today though, we're going to keep the same use case of delivery date, and I'll just show you a really simple example. But once you understand the basics there, you'll be able to really build this out into whatever you'd like inside of Checkout. So now let's go back to our flow again because we're going to be doing the changes over there. We'll go back into shipping addresses, and under shipping address, we need to go back to our screen address component here. And what we're going to be able to do here is we're going to create another component, and that component is going to be able to be dragged into the screen flow here. So if you're not familiar with how to create a Lightning Web Component, or maybe how to create that inside of a screen flow, you might need to do a little bit of research to follow along with me, but I'll try to keep it relatively high level so that you can kind of copy and paste from what I'm doing here. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to open up our Visual Studio code here. And what we're going to want to do is open up our Lightning Web Components. In this instance, this is going to be the first component we've ever done before. So let's create a new Lightning Web Component, and we're going to call this Checkout Delivery Date. And inside of this component, it's going to be super simple. We're going to start with just a simple input here and a header to show that information. I've pre-prepared a lot of this ahead of time, but I'll walk us through as we're kind of going through this so it makes sense here, because the purpose of this is not to show you how to code a new Lightning Web Component, but how to make it work inside of Checkout here. So you can see that we have a template here. We want to show it if it's a Boolean is true for show component. We have a header called a delivery date. We have an input that we are on change capturing the information for and doing something with. That's really all we know at this point. So that's going to be our HTML component here. The next thing that we're going to do is go to our meta file here. And if you're not familiar with Lightning Web Components, the meta file is what actually tells Salesforce what to do with it. Where should this be accessible? What properties are we going to allow as inputs and exports if we're doing that? So what we're going to do is copy again here and paste, and you can see that the delivery date is going to be the name of this. We want this to be accessible in a flow screen, and we're going to have two different properties here. One, which is going to be one of our inputs called cart ID, and one which is going to be an output called delivery date. So we'll save this, and this kind of shows you the scaffolding of what we're trying to build here. We know now what it's going to look like in theory. We know what information we need in and what we need out. So let's get to the meat of this, which is the JavaScript. And again, I'm going to copy and paste most of this. The first thing we're going to need is we're going to need a library from Salesforce called Lightning Flow Support. So we have the capability to be able to push this information in and out of flows as we're doing this screen flow here. So let's open up this class here, and we're going to paste in this, and I'll go through this kind of one at a time. First thing we need to do is add API in here, because we will be tracking the push of the output delivery date variable here, so that the flow has that available for it. You can see we have a couple of variables up here around show component and is disabled. Those are optional if you don't want those, but a lot of times it's nice to have in the components like this. And in most cases, for a component of this complexity, you do need cart ID. In this case, we really don't need the cart ID because we're going to be doing most of this in the flow, but I wanted to show that as an option here, just in case you wanted to know how to bring a cart ID in and maybe make an Apex call out and use that as part of the parameters there. We're not going to be doing that here, but you will be able to understand how to do that because we now have cart ID in here, and we could send that out through a wire or some other call out. So in these two methods here, really just getting the cart ID, setting it to a variable, and getting it ready to be used. And then the two sections down here, these two methods, they're the most important parts for us. So if we go back to our HTML, we can see handle delivery date change matches this handle delivery date change event right here. And so basically what we're saying is when we've changed that input, we want to capture the target value of that input field and map it to the delivery date variable that we've set up at the very top here. And we also want to set disable to true. Again, that's not required, but you'll see kind of what it does in a moment. And the last thing we want to do is we want to send this to the screen flow. And we can do that because we've pulled in the flow attribute change event up here. And we're basically going to pass in the delivery value the user puts in to that output delivery date. And then we're going to dispatch that event back to the flow. So now the flow has that as a variable it can use downstream inside of the rest of the flow there. So now that we've done that, we'll click save here, and we will deploy this up into our instance. And once we have this instance, we're going to hop back to our flow in a moment. Okay, so now we're back on our flow here. We're going to click refresh here so it pulls the latest components for us. And we will go back to our screen component there. And on the very bottom left-hand corner, we should see a new custom component called delivery date. We'll drag that over, and we can see that it doesn't have a preview for ours right here, but we can call it delivery date. We're going to pass in the cart ID. And once we have that pulled in here, we will be able to click done. And now we'll move back over to our cart over here. And what we'll do is we'll map this to the delivery date component here. You can see that it's a little different in the output delivery date there, and click save. And we'll map this up as well. Once we've done that, we will click save as, save, and activate. And we'll move back over into our checkout experience. Now, currently we're on the delivery method screen here, and you may notice by default that the back button isn't available in this screen flow. And it is because of kind of how the checkout flow works by default. So the easiest way, besides going through completion and starting another cart and going through that process, I have a little trick I'll show you here, and that is by going into Workbench, you can do a quick little query to pull the cart checkout session and the actual cart ID here, and it will pull back the session, which basically preloads the checkout to a specific screen flow, which is nice and handy when you're trying to kind of save the state of where a person's at, so they don't have to start over every single time. But it's kind of annoying as we're testing this, so we're simply going to delete this. And once we've deleted that, we'll go back to our checkout and refresh, and now it will start again from the very beginning, and will allow us to test this again. So now that we can see this, we can see now we have two delivery dates on here. One is that standard field from the screen flow. The second one is our component that we have here. And for this purpose right here, we have both on here. However, we'd go back and actually remove the other one. So you really can do whatever you want here. This first one isn't even mapped into the flow anymore. So we should be able to click maybe the 27th now here, and you can see it's disabled. So one of the features I told you don't need to have, but you can. And then click next, and what that should do now is tie all the way back in and update our cart to show the 27th now. So if we go back over here and click refresh on our cart, we should be able to see the 27th, not the 28th, and we do see that on the screen here. So you can see that that quick example here kind of opens the door up to how do I get information onto the cart. We have one last section here to cover in order for us to complete our objective, and that is how do I get it from the cart to the order in order summary. So in order for us to do that, we're going to need to go back to our flows, and we'll go over into the payment and billing flow here. But before I do that, I want to pull up the main flow and just show you kind of where we're going with this. At the very bottom here, you can see you go through several different subflows here, all the way down to what they call cart to order. So cart to order is the subflow, and inside the subflow, the invocable that actually takes the cart and creates the initial order. This is before the order summary gets created as well. But after this subflow here, we will have an order to deal with. And so on this payment and billing address, what we can do is we can take the cart information and we can pass it to the order and use that subflow as kind of a junction between the two of them. So that's what we're going to be doing here. We'll go to payment and billing. I'll have to do the same thing here where we click save as, and we'll do tiny homes, payment and billing, and click save. And if we go over to the right hand side here, you can see that we already have a couple of sections where we're basically deciding what payment type is being selected on, and then updating the order based on that information. So we're going to use some of this for us here. But before we can do any of the updating over here, what we need to do is go over to the initial component here, which is essentially getting the information from the cart. But we're going to add in another field here, which is that delivery date, because we want to pull that across as well. And actually we need to do that down here, and we will do delivery date, and we're going to map this into a new variable called delivery date, and we will click done there. So now that's going to map into the delivery date, and we'll click done. And now we'll have that available for us. So we'll be able to go over to some of these components here, and we're basically going to map in a new delivery date for us. So we'll click the delivery date on the order, and we want to map in delivery date variable we just captured from the cart. And we will, looks like we need to update some security real quick. So let's go over to our order. And what we'll do is find the PO field, and it looks like we just need to add visibility to that for the system administrator. I'll come across this a couple of times in this kind of initial setup here that you might miss a couple of field level security initial pieces, but we'll go back over into our screen flow, and we will click refresh because we are going to need to pull that new context in. Let's go check to make sure that we have visibility, which we do now. Great. So we'll go back over and just do that one more time for us. New variable, delivery date. Okay, let's try that one more time. Okay, and we'll click done there. So we have that updated now. However, in the initial payment and billing, you can see there's kind of a fork here. So if we're updating the address, it's going to go down to this bottom section. If it's not updating, it's kind of the default outcome, then we'll need to update this as well. So we'll want to go up here also, and we'll want to go to delivery date as well here and map that in and click done and save. And now what will happen is when we've progressed through checkout, it will move from the cart to the order. And just for simplicity's sake, I'm not going to show all the way that through completion here, but I will make one more note here that because we've put this on the order, and because we have the same field on order and order summary, what will happen is when the order is converted into the order summary, which happens at this step here under activate order, it will automatically pull the delivery date from order and move that over to the order summary as well. So that part of it's automatic. We don't need to do any processing around that. So at this point, what we've done is we've completed our delivery date objective. Thanks everyone for watching and staying with me here to the end. Hopefully this was valuable for you. Like and subscribe if you're finding this value, and comment if you have any questions or have ideas for future videos. Thanks everyone.